Hi everyone, we're here again at the International Journalism Festival. I'm Ryan Costello with Project Council Media. Very pleased to have with me at the moment the co-directors of Code Red, Machon and Simon Davies. Code Red is a global initiative to accelerate the reform of security organizations. And how they're doing that exactly is they're creating bridges and synergies between various disciplines, let's say, civil society, technical domains, legal and policy worlds. Very interesting presentation on sort of the launch of Code Red that they just delivered. So I just wanted to ask a couple questions, generally speaking, sort of how you're specifically engaging the legal and policy world in this regard as a general matter, and maybe some of the specific challenges in that. This morning, we visited a panel on Freedom of Information Act. And in 1992, there were only 14 or 15 Freedom of Information Acts on the books in the world. Now there's 102, including 42 in Europe. So that's great, but the strength of these pieces of legislation often varies. And there's also specific sort of technical issues sometimes with how you define information. What does that mean? So if you could maybe elaborate on some of those examples, I'd appreciate it. Simon, can we kick off with you?
Absolutely. The first thing I'd say is that the legal community is one of the most important stakeholder groups that we have. If we want to create reform of whether it's surveillance or freedom of information, we're going to have to engage the legal community, and we are. And there are some tremendous benchmarks out there. I mean, it's a bit difficult for lawyers at one level because, I mean, you guys have to interpret, you're the sort of foot soldiers, as it were, for what's dished out to you. But that doesn't have to be the case. And I think one of the objectives we would have is to support the legal community in becoming more activist. Now, there is a great precedent for this in the United Kingdom, the Law Society of England and Wales. They have been activists in the sense of, certainly under a couple of the previous presidents, they've actually created policy engagement directly with the government, involving the public, and brought lawyers right to the mainstream of law reform. Now, I'd love to see that across the world, but in some countries, lawyers tend to be a little passive. They say, no, we've just got to interpret what we have. Other countries are saying, no, it's our responsibility. We are opinion formers. We're informed people, and we want to engage those people to become more activist.
Thanks very much, Simon. Annie, can I jump to you for a minute? Anything you'd like to add in this regard?
Well, certainly it's interesting that so many countries are now adopting a Freedom of Information Act. But it does vary incredibly from country to country. In fact, only this morning at this International Journalism Festival in Perugia, I learned that there is a Freedom of Information Act from the 1990s in Italy, but actually only people are only allowed to find out information pertaining to themselves. Whereas, of course, if you want an active and informed citizenry and a very active and informed media, they need to be able to investigate things not just pertaining to themselves, but potentially, massive corruption or political scandals. So, for example, as well in the UK, yes, journalists can apply for information like that. We do have a Freedom of Information Act, which was hard won. However, even there, we find situations where, for example, the intelligence agencies are specifically exempt from any coverage of those laws, which is a nonsense, because these are the very people that do need to be held to account. Not necessarily putting everything out there, but they need certainly to be able to be held to account by a proper oversight committee.
Thank you, Annie. That was a very interesting point, I thought, from the panel this morning, that having the Freedom of Information, Freedom of Information Access Act in place, while good, having a very strong oversight of that, a body that's well-funded and well-supported, also by the citizenry, people that are active in supporting that, is very, very important. And that seems like that's sort of the kind of direction that you'd like to go with Code Red. I mean, that's...
There are so many domains such as freedom of information where we've got to get greater clarity and cooperation and information. But something I'd say on a quite mundane element that I think is critically important, it's the empowerment of professionals like legal professionals to feed in to other networks what might seem insignificant data. For example, you might have a client who comes forward. It could be a whistleblower. It could be somebody who just has a concern about being rolled over by the government or the local police authority. We need to hear this. We don't need to know the person's name or details, but we need that data put into a cooperative web, if you like, a clearinghouse, so it can be picked up by other professionals in other disciplines and used. So it's almost like the raw material that can create campaigns. Now, I think lawyers have kind of been left out of this equation because those channels don't exist at the moment, and that's one of the challenges for Code Red.
Very interesting stuff, guys. Thanks so much for your time. I really appreciate it. Enjoy the rest of the festival. Thank you.
Thank you.